On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched the largest military invasion in human history against the largest country on Earth, without a winter plan, without adequate supply lines, and against the explicit advice of almost every senior general he had. He expected it to be over in 10 weeks. He was wrong by approximately 4 years and 27 million lives. Before Barbarossa can be understood as a failure, it has to be understood as a plan, a remarkably sophisticated plan built on a catastrophically wrong assumption. Operation Barbarossa had been in development since July 1940, less than a month after France fell. Hitler had always intended to invade the Soviet Union. Lebensraum in the East and the destruction of what he called Jewish Bolshevism were not additions to Nazi ideology. They were its foundation. The timing was driven by two beliefs: break Britain by destroying its hoped-for Soviet partner and seize the oil, grain, and raw materials Germany needed for a long war. The plan divided the invasion into 3 army groups along an 1,800-mile front: north toward Leningrad, center toward Moscow, south toward Kiev and the oil fields. Field Marshal von Lepp in the north, Field Marshal von Bock at the center of gravity, Field Marshal von Rundstedt in the south. All 3 objectives were to be achieved within 8 to 10 weeks, before autumn rains turned roads to mud and before the Russian winter made operations impossible. It was logical, it was ambitious, and it rested on one assumption. Hitler and the OKW believed the Soviet military would collapse under the initial shock. Stalin's purge had executed or imprisoned roughly 35,000 officers. The Winter War against Finland, where the Red Army struggled against a nation of 3.7 million, seemed to confirm incompetence. The OKW assessed the Soviet Union as a rotting structure that would collapse at the first serious blow. That assessment was wrong in almost every particular. But on paper, in June 1941, the plan felt inevitable. Now, the 3 army groups, the 10-week timeline, the assumption of Soviet collapse, that's the plan on June 21st. The first 48 hours looked like complete vindication, and that early success is exactly what made what came next so catastrophic, because the success was hiding something. The opening of Barbarossa was one of the most devastating strikes in history, complete tactical surprise after months of preparation. Warnings had reached Stalin from Britain, from agents, even German defectors. He refused to believe them, convinced it was British provocation. Front commanders were initially forbidden to return fire without authorization. Orders came too late. Units were overrun. In the first day alone, the Soviet Air Force lost about 1,200 aircraft, most destroyed on the ground. Panzer groups bypassed defenses, drove deep, and linked up to encircle entire armies. Columns of prisoners stretched for miles, thousands, then tens of thousands. Bialystok-Minsk in the first weeks, roughly 290,000 captured. Smolensk in July, another 310,000. Kiev in September, the largest encirclement in military history, about 600,000 captured. But the victories were hiding a different reality. Soviet units that escaped kept fighting. New divisions kept arriving from the east. Stalin was relocating industry beyond the Urals, beyond German reach, and it kept producing. Most critically, German logistics were already straining. Fuel, ammunition, mechanical reliability consumed faster than they could be replaced. Barbarossa was built for 8 to 10 weeks. By mid-July, the timeline had slipped and the supply lines outran their design. The Wehrmacht relied on roughly 750,000 horses. They could not keep pace with the panzers. Fuel shortages halted advances no enemy had stopped. Western-designed vehicles were braking on Soviet roads faster than maintenance could cope with. By mid-August, some panzer divisions were at 40 to 50% of authorized tanks, mostly from breakdowns, not battle. Then the T-34 appeared, faster, better armored, and built for these conditions. German anti-tank rounds bounced off at normal ranges. OKW had no intelligence it existed. Its capabilities were a complete surprise. Soviet forces were supposed to collapse. Instead, they fought to destruction. Commanders adapted, pulling back, learning from encirclements, buying time. By December 1941, the Red Army was functionally a different force. Rebuilt, retrained, led by survivors who had learned fast. Warnings were visible on the ground. The picture at OKW headquarters lagged behind reality. By August 1941, the army was behind schedule and undersupplied. At the exact moment a decisive thrust was needed, Hitler chose otherwise. The general who argued against it flew in to say so. Hitler listened, then overruled him. By August, Army Group Center was within striking distance of Moscow. General Heinz Guderian, the Wehrmacht's premier panzer commander, was positioned to make the attempt. Hitler issued Directive 34, diverting Guderian south toward Kiev for economic objectives he considered paramount. Guderian flew to the Wolfschanze with maps, casualty figures, logistics data. He argued Moscow had to be the priority, that 6 weeks lost would be fatal. Hitler heard every word. Then he overruled him. Kiev was a tactical masterpiece, 600,000 captured, and it cost 6 irreplaceable weeks. When the drive on Moscow began in October, the autumn rains had turned roads to mud. What was possible in August became a desperate race in October. By December, advance units could see the Kremlin through their field glasses, in -40 degrees. German soldiers had been issued no winter equipment. On December 5, 1941, 2 days before Pearl Harbor, the Soviet Union launched a massive counteroffensive outside Moscow. Intelligence from Richard Sorge in Tokyo freed Stalin to transfer 18 divisions from the Far East, trained and equipped for winter. They hit a German army that was exhausted, frozen, undersupplied, and a fraction of its summer strength. The Germans were driven back from Moscow, in places by 150 to 200 miles, the first major strategic retreat of the war. Hitler responded by dismissing 35 generals, von Brauchitsch, von Bock, von Rundstedt, von Lieb among them, and assuming personal command. A former corporal with no formal military education was now directing the largest land war in history. Professional judgment at the top evaporated. Field decisions stalled awaiting approval. A new pattern began. No retreats authorized regardless of necessity, a pattern that would later destroy entire German armies at Stalingrad and beyond. Barbarossa had failed. The long defeat had begun. There was a document before the invasion showing the plan could not work. And the man who wrote it knew exactly why. General Georg Thomas, chief of the Wehrmacht's War Economy and Armaments Office, did the math. Before Barbarossa, he produced a detailed economic analysis of the campaign's viability. His conclusion was blunt. Germany lacked the economic and logistical capacity to sustain war beyond the initial offensive. The Soviet industrial base, once relocated east of the Urals, lay beyond German reach. Vehicle and fuel consumption would outpace production within months. Germany could win battles, not a prolonged war of attrition. Thomas presented it to OKW. It was noted. It was filed. The invasion launched anyway. When the Soviet military did not collapse on schedule, every one of his predictions came true, simultaneously. Barbarossa matters for 3 reasons: strategic overreach driven by ideology, the decisive Eastern Front, and a pattern that repeats. Roughly 70 to 80% of German military casualties fell on this front. The Soviet Union bore the primary burden, 27 million dead. Powerful states still launch wars assuming rapid collapse without planning for the long fight. History doesn't repeat, but it has patterns. Operation Barbarossa was the largest military invasion in human history, planned for 10 weeks. It lasted 4 years. It killed 27 million Soviet civilians and soldiers. It destroyed the Wehrmacht as an offensive force. It made Allied victory possible. And it was launched against the advice of the generals, against the economic analysis, and against the geography of the largest country on Earth. The plan failed miserably. The question worth asking is why it was ever the plan. History's dark archives. The plan is always confident. The archive is always honest.